I never thought I'd have to fight for what was already mine. My family had owned this land for over 100 years, before fancy subdivisions and power-hungry HOAs ever existed. But one day I woke up to find out that the people who were supposed to be managing a few neighborhood lawns had set their sights on something much bigger: my farm. It started with a letter taped to my front gate. Not in my mailbox, not delivered like a normal notice. No, this was slapped onto my property like a warning sign. Notice of violation. Unapproved agricultural activities. Immediate compliance required. I frowned. This had to be a mistake. I wasn't part of the HOA. I never signed anything, never attended their ridiculous board meetings. My farm sat on its own land, separate from the cookie-cutter houses and strict neighborhood rules. But that letter wasn't the only surprise. As I walked back to my house, my phone started blowing up. 10 missed calls from my neighbors. 3 voicemails from my cousin. 1 email from the HOA. I opened it and my stomach twisted. Your continued violations are subject to a daily fine of $200. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in legal action. Violations? What violations? I ran my farm the same way my grandfather had before me. Chickens in the coop, crops in the fields, a tractor that worked harder than half the people in that HOA combined. But according to them, your tractor noise is a disruption to peaceful enjoyment. Your chicken coop emits offensive odors that lower property values. You are operating an unauthorized agricultural business in a residential zone. I almost laughed. These people had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning they came in person. A black SUV pulled up, and out stepped Deborah Williams, the HOA president, a woman who looked like she'd never set foot on dirt in her life. She wore a white pantsuit, the kind that screamed power trip, and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. Flanking her were 2 board members looking just as smug. "Ms. Walker," she said, her voice smooth but condescending, "we need to discuss your ongoing violations." I crossed my arms. "There's nothing to discuss. Your HOA has no jurisdiction here." Her lips curled into a tight smile. "Actually, according to the county zoning board, your agricultural exemption expired last year. That means your land is now subject to our regulations." For the first time, I hesitated. My agricultural exemption? I never received a notice. My property taxes hadn't changed. Deborah must have sensed my doubt because her smile widened. "Times change, Ms. Walker. We have standards now." Then she handed me a cease and desist order and turned on her heel. The SUV doors slammed shut, and just like that they were gone. But something didn't sit right. That night I called my cousin Tom. He lived in Oak Ridge Estates, the neighborhood run by Deborah and her board of mini-dictators. More importantly, he sat on the town council. "They've been planning this for months," Tom said, his voice tense. "Deborah's been meeting with developers behind closed doors. There's talk of a massive new project. And your farm? It's right in the middle of it." I clenched my jaw. So that was their game. They weren't just trying to fine me into submission. They wanted my land. And I wasn't about to let that happen. I didn't sleep that night. After my conversation with Tom, my mind raced with possibilities. If the HOA was planning something big, I needed to know exactly what they were up to. But first, I had to confirm whether Deborah was lying about my agricultural exemption. At sunrise, I drove straight to the county zoning office. The clerk at the front desk barely looked up when I asked for records on my property. After some typing, she frowned at the screen. "It says here your agricultural exemption is still valid for another 5 years." I exhaled slowly. They lied. Deborah had walked onto my property, handed me a fraudulent order, and expected me to roll over. They think I'm stupid. I asked for a certified copy of the records and left, gripping the papers like they were a loaded weapon. Now I had proof, but I still didn't know why they were after my farm. That changed later that evening. I was fixing the fence near my eastern fields when I noticed something unusual: 3 men in suits standing by the tree line. They weren't from around here. I dropped my tools and marched toward them. "Can I help you?" A tall man with slick back hair turned. "James Miller," that's what his badge said. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile you see on someone who already thinks they've won. "We're just doing a survey. You must be the owner." I narrowed my eyes. "Surveying for what?" He pulled a folder from his briefcase and opened it. I stared at the pages, official-looking documents with survey maps, county stamps, and a contract. Then my stomach dropped. Westview Development Corporation. Land acquired from Oak Ridge Estates HOA. 1,700 acres purchased, construction begins next month. I froze. 1,700 acres? My farm wasn't 1,700 acres. Unless they thought they already owned it. That's impossible, I said. I never sold my land. Miller blinked. According to our records, you did. He pointed to the contract, a sale agreement with my name on it. I snatched the papers from him and there it was, my signature staring back at me. Except I had never signed anything. They forged it. A cold, burning rage settled in my chest. I turned on my heel and drove straight home. My hands shook as I unlocked the safe in my office and pulled out my original property deeds. Everything looked fine, at first. But when I compared it to the document Miller showed me, something felt off. I grabbed my phone and dialed the county recorder's office. Sir, there was an ownership division filing 6 weeks ago, the clerk said. According to our records, 1,700 acres were transferred to Oak Ridge Estates Community Trust. You now only own 300 acres. I nearly dropped the phone. That's impossible. I never signed any transfer. The clerk hesitated. Well, the documents have your signature. Can you email me a copy? A minute later the file arrived. I clicked it open. And that's when I saw her. Deborah. She was in the background of the notarized documents, sitting in her luxury SUV watching. When I looked out my window, she was there again, parked at the edge of my property, smiling. She knew exactly what she had done. And she thought I couldn't stop her. I didn't waste another second. With the forged documents in hand, I called my cousin Tom again. He picked up on the first ring. Tell me you have something, I said. Tom sighed. I have more than something. You're not the only one they're messing with. That got my attention. Go on. Deborah's been rewriting meeting minutes after they're approved. She's been fast-tracking zoning changes to push your land under HOA control. And get this, she's had private meetings with Westview Development Corporation for over a year. They knew about this land grab long before you did. My blood boiled. They had planned everything. The fake fines, the false violations, it was all a setup to get me off my own property. But if they thought I was going to roll over, they were dead wrong. By morning I had a plan. I packed every document I had, the original property deeds, the county zoning exemption, the fake sale contract with my forged signature, and headed straight to my lawyer. Old Frank Delaney had been handling my family's legal affairs for decades. He took one look at the paperwork and let out a low whistle. Well, this is some next-level fraud. Can we stop them? I asked. Oh, we can do a hell of a lot more than that. He made 3 calls. The county recorder's office, to file a formal dispute against the fraudulent sale. A forensic document examiner, to analyze the fake signature and confirm it wasn't mine. A local journalist, because if there's one thing HOAs hate more than legal trouble, it's bad press. They're gonna regret messing with you, Frank said. I sure as hell hoped so. Step 2, bringing the fight to their doorstep. By the next day things were already heating up. First, the county recorder's office froze the transaction. That meant Westview Development couldn't legally begin construction until my case was settled. Then the forensic examiner confirmed my signature was forged. That alone was enough to turn this into a criminal case. But the real fun started when the news broke. That night, an investigative report aired on local TV. It wasn't just about me, it was about the entire corruption scheme the HOA had been running. Oak Ridge Estates HOA accused of land fraud scandal. Local farmers claim fraudulent sales and illegal rezoning efforts. Did this HOA forge signatures to steal land? The segment included a split-screen comparison of my real signature and the fake one. Anyone with eyes could see they weren't the same. Within hours my phone blew up. Heavy checkmark, neighbors called, furious that the HOA had gone this far. Heavy checkmark, other homeowners stepped forward with their own complaints. Heavy checkmark, even some HOA board members distanced themselves from Deborah. And then, just like I hoped, Deborah showed up at my gate. Step 3, Deborah cracks. The same black SUV pulled in, but this time, Deborah wasn't smiling. She got out, her usual confidence replaced with something else, panic. We need to talk, she said, forcing a polite tone. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed. Now you want to talk? She took a deep breath. I think we got off on the wrong foot. There's no need to involve lawyers. We can work this out privately. I smirked. Privately? You forged my signature, tried to steal my land, and now that your little scheme is on the news, you want to settle this quietly? Her jaw tightened. If this goes to court, it will take years to resolve. We can avoid all of that. I'm willing to make you an offer. I let her sweat for a moment before answering. I don't want your money, Deborah. I want my land back. Every inch of it. Her eyes darkened. That's not possible. I straightened up. Then neither is your development. The longer she stood there, the clearer it became she was losing control. She didn't expect me to fight back. She expected me to fold like so many others had. But I wasn't them. And I wasn't finished yet. Deborah left my property that day with nothing but a bruised ego and a sinking realization she was losing. But I knew better than to assume she'd give up. People like her don't know how to quit. They double down, they get desperate, and that's when they make mistakes. I didn't have to wait long for her next move. The very next morning, a sheriff's car rolled up my driveway. I was already outside repairing a fence when Sheriff Davis, a guy I'd known since high school, stepped out with an apologetic look. "Mike, we need to talk." I wiped the sweat off my forehead. "Let me guess. More noise complaints." He sighed. "Worse. The HOA filed a petition to classify your farm as a public nuisance. If it goes through, you'll be forced to shut down operations indefinitely." I clenched my jaw. So this was their game now. If they couldn't steal my land, they'd try to make it worthless. Davis hesitated. "Look, I don't believe a word of it, but they have signatures from homeowners claiming your farm is lowering property values." I crossed my arms. And how many of those homeowners actually signed it, and how many were, let's say, encouraged to sign? Davis shook his head. "That's what I came here to tell you. Some of the people on this list? They're furious. They say they never signed anything." I smirked. Deborah had just made her biggest mistake yet. She faked documents once and got caught. Now she was doing it again? This time I didn't even have to fight back. The HOA was destroying itself. I sent those homeowners directly to Frank, my lawyer, who was more than happy to draft up legal complaints. Within 48 hours, Deborah was drowning in accusations of fraud from both the county and her own neighborhood. But that wasn't even the best part. The Westview Development Corporation, the same company that thought they had secured my land, suddenly went silent. Turns out, they weren't thrilled to be tied to a public scandal. Investors hate bad press, and once the news exposed the fraudulent land transfers, they pulled their funding. No funding meant no project. No project meant the HOA had nothing left to fight for. And then, just like that, the house of cards came tumbling down. It happened fast. The fraudulent land sale was officially voided. The county reversed the transaction, putting all 1,700 acres back in my name. The lawsuit against the HOA gained traction. Between the forged documents, fraudulent petitions, and corrupt backroom deals, it was only a matter of time before legal action took Deborah down. Westview Development abandoned the project entirely. Without my land, their entire plan collapsed. Investors cut their losses and ran. And Deborah? She tried to fight back, but even her own HOA board members turned against her to save themselves. They voted her out as president within a week. The Oak Ridge Estates HOA was dissolved soon after, completely bankrupt from legal fees, fines, and fleeing members. The same people who once stood by Deborah, enforcing her every rule, were now the ones tearing her down. I was standing by the barn when I saw the familiar black SUV roll up one last time. Deborah stepped out, but she wasn't wearing her usual smug expression. She looked defeated. "I hope you're happy," she said bitterly. I raised an eyebrow. "I will be once you tell me why you really did it." She hesitated, then sighed. "I had a deal. If I got your land under HOA control, I would have gotten a seat at the table with Westview's investors. Real money. A future beyond this neighborhood." I shook my head. "You were willing to destroy someone else's future just to secure your own?" She didn't answer. She knew I was right. For the first time she looked small. Weak. Just another person who thought they were invincible, until they weren't. She turned to leave, but I had one last thing to say. "Deborah, if you ever come back here, you won't like how it ends." She didn't look back. And just like that, she was gone. The war was over, but my fight wasn't finished. Winning wasn't enough. I had to make sure no one could ever pull something like this again. With the HOA dissolved, Westview Development gone, and Deborah out of power, I finally had my land back. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to make them pay. With my lawyer Frank's help, I filed a lawsuit against Deborah and the former HOA board for fraud, forgery, and damages. It wasn't just about me. Several other homeowners had been victims of their corruption. Heavy checkmark, the court ruled in my favor. Deborah was found personally liable for falsifying documents. Heavy checkmark, she lost everything. Her assets were frozen, her home was repossessed, and her once powerful reputation? Gone. Heavy checkmark, the HOA's remaining funds were seized and distributed back to homeowners who had been wronged. But the best part? I had one final move left to play. With the lawsuit settled, I now had legal leverage over the land surrounding my farm. Several of the homeowners who once supported the HOA wanted out. So I made them an offer. Sell your property to me, and I'll make sure you never deal with another HOA again. A few refused. But most? They sold. Within a year, I had bought up over half the neighborhood. And what did I do with it? I rezoned the entire thing as agricultural land. That's right. The same pristine cookie-cutter neighborhood that Deborah fought so hard to protect from my farm? It was now officially farmland. The best part? HOA restrictions no longer applied, which meant I could do whatever I wanted. One morning I walked out to my fields and looked around at what I had built. Heavy checkmark, the HOA was gone. Heavy checkmark, Deborah was ruined. Heavy checkmark, and my farm? Bigger than ever. But I wasn't done. I had one final piece of revenge left. With all the land I had acquired, I installed a brand new chicken coop, right where Deborah's old house used to be. And just to make sure she knew, I sent her a framed photo of it. No note. No message. Just a picture of a coop full of clucking chickens, right where her mansion once stood. She got the message. In the end, I didn't just get my farm back. I got everything. I built something that would last, something my family could hold on to for generations. And the people who tried to take it from me? They lost. Because if there's one thing you never do, it's try to steal from a man who controls your water. And I made sure they never forgot it.